All right. Welcome, everybody, all of our millions of viewers and listeners. So today we have a special guest. Care to introduce yourself, special guest?
Hi, I'm special guest. Hi, my name is Jess Davidson. I am the managing director of End Rape on campus. We also call ourselves EROC. It's a little shorter. And I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm joining today to talk about Title IX and what Betsy DeVos just did.
Whoop, whoop. So yeah, you had mentioned earlier that this, because the world is a garbage fire, nobody is paying attention to this issue because there are other crazy issues also happening. So we're trying to, get a little bit of press on this, our tiny corner of the internet.
Is this burning you up, Natasha?
What's that?
This one burning you up particularly?
It's, well, it's the kind of thing where it's burning me up, but then, my brain is much like the news cycle, where it can only hold so much. So then I have to shove it to the back of my brain, and then when I remember it's there, I'm like, oh, right, another horrible thing. But yeah, please, so tell us about Title IX and good old Betsy. Dependable Betsy.
So I'll give a 30,000-foot overview for folks who don't know very much about Title IX. I think a lot of people used to think about Title IX as a sports equity law. What Title IX, and what Title IX says is that nobody can be denied equal access to education because of their gender. And so as the national crisis of campus sexual violence started to be realized, people started using Title IX as a way to help survivors of sexual violence on campus achieve what they need to have equal access to education after experiencing sexual assault. So Title IX doesn't just help ensure that we have girls' soccer teams, it also helps ensure that survivors of sexual violence can get accommodations at school, can have a Title IX hearing process to have their assailant removed from school, and also has protections for transgender folks, gender nonconforming folks, anybody who might be at risk to have equal access to education because of their gender or gender identity.
So wouldn't schools just do that anyway?
You would hope, right?
Right? That'd be a good thing. Why do we,
I'm over here just memeing, sipping a cup of tea,
right.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
Right. And I think
it seems like basic humanity.
Right. And I think when you think about the way that these institutions were built, college campuses were not designed to be a safe place for women always. When education first started, it was something that women were locked out of. It was something that people of color were locked out of. And so that's why these civil rights laws are so important, because these institutions were not designed for women, for people of color, for trans people to succeed. And so we do need these laws to protect them, because honestly, the schools aren't. Schools really have this incentive to sweep sexual violence under the rug. Nobody wants to be known as the school where rape happens. It's all of them, but nobody wants to be the school where rape happens. And so they have an incentive to keep it quiet, and they can do that better if students are not accessing the tools and accommodations that they have under Title IX.
Got it. So without some prompting from the government, they're likely to tell victims that they should just be quiet, or that it didn't happen, or they were drunk and they should probably be embarrassed, instead of, I don't know, saying, that's terrible that you got raped.
Right. Exactly.
Well, terrible. And oh my gosh.
And I was talking to the Fire the other week, and they were talking about how they defend free speech rights on campus, and how a campus was bullying a girl into not talking about her rape to her friends and getting support, and we're sanctioning her for talking to people about that. So it's not even getting activism, it's being able to process and cope and recover is also being shot down and not accepted, which is something completely different and also completely horrific. It's all horrific, But
yeah. So in 2012, 2013, a lot of survivors across the country started to realize that the way that they had been turned away by their campus administration for reporting was happening not just at their school, but that this was actually an epidemic across the country. And that realization led to this kind of watershed moment of activists and survivors and their families speaking out. The Obama White House started paying attention to the issue. Congress started paying attention to the issue. And what the Department of Education did is they said they gave schools a reminder of what their obligations were under the law. So there's this misnomer that the Department of Ed created new rules, created new laws, added additional regulation. They didn't. They heard from students and survivors who were being told by their campus administrators that rape is like a football game and you just have to think about what you should have done differently. And they were taking a look at pre-existing case law that had been upheld by 4 decades of presidential administrations on both sides of the aisle. And it was really clear that between these cases and between previously existing guidance, that schools needed a clarification that you cannot tell a rape survivor that what happened to them is like a football game and that they are obligated to investigate it.
I wish that there was like something I could do to convey to people only listening to this what my face just did when you said that.
I think all of us laughed at each other's faces. We all realized we were making those faces and we were all like, oh shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the things that I see on cases that come across my desk, even now in 2017, just the most outrageous excuses for not investigating sexual violence or for finding assailants not guilty. Like, people really don't want to look this square in the face. And so we really need the government to help them do that. But Betsy DeVos isn't really interested in that. She wants to go backwards to a time when rapists were legitimately slapped on the wrist with a $20 fine and told to write a paper about what they learned. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So there were 2 key pieces of guidance that helped do that and helped remind schools what their responsibilities were. And this is the downward pressure that DeVos and the administration are talking about. So the first is the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. That was guidance with a series of recommendations from the department about how to be compliant in Title IX, like I just described, by looking at case law and looking at other Dear Colleague letters and guidance and saying, these are your responsibilities. And then when they realized after the 2011 letter, with all of the student activism that was taking place in 2012 and 2013, that a lot of schools still weren't getting it right, they issued a question and answer document in 2014, helping schools get further clarification. Additionally, in 2014, the White House launched It's on Us, and the vice president started speaking out a lot more about this. And we really started to see a major shift in the culture and in the way that students were talking about sexual violence. Nothing at the legal level had changed. The government hadn't put any new laws on the books, but people were able to talk about this more freely, and schools were reminded what they had to do. And we just saw this watershed of survivors come forward and say, it happened to me too, it happened to me too. And we really started to have a sense of what an epidemic this was.
Mm-hmm.
It really did just burst into the mainstream consciousness all at once, I felt like.
Yeah.
So there is, when I was looking up articles on this topic and finding what I could include in the broadcast newsletter, there were a lot of articles talking about how Title IX tramples over the rights of the accused. And I am not paraphrasing, that is the wording that was used.
That's right.
There's many sides to
There's
read.
good people on many sides, all the sides.
So can you get into like why people believe that and what is... just tell us why that's wrong.
Yeah.
As somebody who's supposed to be unbiased on this, I should not be using that language, but there it is.
Yeah, so many reasons why that's wrong. So what guidance from the department does, and if you actually read the 2011 Dear Colleague letter, which from DeVos's remarks on Thursday, it's not clear that she's actually ever done, you'll see that the language requires equity for both parties. So all of the things that are given to survivors during this process that supposedly trample on the rights of the accused are actually also given to the accused. So equal time to review the documents, notice of what you're being investigated for, ability to read and dispute what people are saying about you, ability to present witnesses, all of that under the 2011 Dear Colleague letter and under other guidance is equal for both sides. There's nothing in that document that only benefits survivors. And actually, the entirety of the 2011 Dear Colleague letter provides more protections for alleged rapists than the Constitution. The entirety of the Constitution provides any single person. And so people that are being found guilty of sexual assault feel that the cards are, or that the deck is stacked against them because the deck is fair. And for the first time ever, we're not sweeping sexual violence under the rug. We're actually doing a fair investigation. And because we live in a rape culture and in a society where that has been permissible before, it feels very unfair to them because it's actually being investigated in a fair and impartial way. Now, I will say that a lot of campuses do struggle with enforcement on Title IX, but the flaw is not the document. The flaw is the campus and their lack of resources or their lack of commitment. This isn't something where the guidance itself is unclear. And DeVos actually said that in her remarks on Thursday. She was like, lawyers said that it's confusing. I have 18-year-old clients who can understand the document. So I don't know where those lawyers got their education, but that's a problem.
Well, I looked it up so that I could read it, and it's only 20 pages long. It's not like this enormous tome, and It is clear.
It's very
and also like an issue that they were bringing up with like it's not fair to everyone is like obviously false accusations, which they like keep bringing up, and they'll like talk about like a girl who like said that her boyfriend raped her and then like recants it later. But like they kept bringing up like football teams and like sports teams, and like please tell me that they did not get bullied into recanting. Like this is like the kind of issue like again with like being able to manage it correctly is like you can point to cases like that, but then do you actually know what the hell went on there and like what was happening to the people? And like it's just so not okay.
There is a an episode of Broadcast from months ago that listeners can find where I talk about victims of rape who were bullied into recanting their accusations, and a couple times they were bullied into it and then arrested after being forced to recant. And like there are women who are serving sentences of multiple years in prison for recanting.
For perjury. Yeah.
And it's just like it's astonishing to me that this stuff doesn't get acknowledged more. And there was an example in one of these articles that was talking about trampling the rights. I think it was a Slate article, and they had shared some examples of crazy cases at colleges that, you know, Title IX ensured that even though it was consensual sex and the woman swore it was consensual and there were texts to prove that they were in a relationship, that a third party accused the guy of rape, and so he was expelled anyway. And in these cases, again, I'm like, one, I don't know enough about this case, but mostly, isn't that just poor judgment on the school's part? That's, again, not the document's fault that you don't know how to apply. Like, if you're working on behalf of a woman who says that she was not assaulted, and then you can't blame Title IX for the way that this was handled by the school. It just feels, I mean, that feels pretty obvious, but Title IX was just blamed throughout. And like, I think the closing sentence on the linked article that they had given as an example about this other case was just, this is the new reality under Title IX. And I was just like, oh my God, like, no, if you're, I'm like,
the issue that I find with this rhetoric is that like also it's going into the like national viewpoint now, and like false accusations are getting presented as equal to real accusations, and like the number one thing that you need to do is believe people and support them. And like the way that this coverage and how the topic is being covered and like not talked about is like bringing us back like so far, and that's not cool.
I think what most people don't understand is just how rare false accusations are. So sexual violence is the most underreported crime on campuses and the second most underreported crime, like in general. And so most of the people who are sexually assaulted aren't even reporting. Then the FBI and the Department of Justice have consistently found that the rate of false reports is between 2 and 8%. That study has almost always leaned towards the 2% of the statistic, but to be statistically accurate, we have to say 2 to 8%. That's the same rate of false reporting as any other violent crime, meaning you are just as likely to be falsely accused of rape as you are to be falsely accused of murder. But nobody walks around being terrified that they're going to be falsely accused of murder. Mm-hmm. And so there's this, I mean, of course, if somebody is accused of sexual violence, they're going to say that it's not true. They're going to say that the woman is lying, because it's so easy for assailants to do that in a society that has such a poor definition of consent and where sexual violence has been permissible. For God's sake, our president has committed sexual assault. We live in a society where this is permissible. And so, of course, they're going to say that they didn't do it. That doesn't actually mean that it's a false accusation. False accusations are extremely rare, and most accusations are never even made because it's so dangerous for survivors to report. And then just like this false equivalency that DeVos is setting up and that the media is setting up is so dangerous. What DeVos did in her remarks, what she's done with her rhetoric. You know, I was part of the series of meetings with her in July where she had an hour and a half of meetings with survivors and advocates, and then she spent an hour and a half meeting with men's rights advocates and the falsely accused. That alone, doing an hour and a half with rape survivors and then an hour and a half with men who claim to have been falsely accused, that alone sets up this false equivalency. Then her rhetoric on Thursday, it's so reminiscent of the like good people on many sides rhetoric that Trump has been using. And it's just not true. For one, to say that the impact on an individual of rape is anywhere near equivalent, the impact of being wrongfully kicked out of school is so disgusting that I can't even begin to stomach it. Like, that's just inaccurate. It doesn't take into account the neurobiology of trauma. It doesn't take into account how trauma literally physically changes the brain and the body of somebody who experiences it. And it's statistically inaccurate. Between 2 and 8% of all of these reports could be false, and it's significantly underreported. Meanwhile, at least 1 in every 5 women, at least 1 in every 16 men, and far higher rates for transgender, people of color, gender nonconforming, and LGBT students are assaulted in college. And so students are so much more likely to experience sexual violence than they are to be falsely accused of it. Men are more likely to be survivors than they are to commit it. And so to say that this is like a men versus women, that this is some both equal sides thing is just untrue. And it's the department's way of trying to get us to go back to a time when rape was swept under the rug.
So what has Betsy done? If this was just clarifying what Title IX means, then what can she do to roll it back? Like, what has she done?
So great question. So it needs to be really clear to all the listeners that Title IX is still the law. The law is the law, and Betsy DeVos cannot change that. What she's doing is she's changing how Title IX is enforced. But that's still dangerous because if civil rights aren't enforced, they're not actually useful as civil rights. And we know that this administration is hell-bent on not enforcing civil rights. And so what she's trying to do is she is rescinding the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. And then she's opening a period of notice and comment for other guidance that we can presume is going to replace the letter or help colleges understand how to fulfill their obligations under Title IX. I wish that I had a clearer answer other than that, but DeVos has been so non-specific about what she's doing that it's hard for me to say other than she is rolling back guidance that helps enforce Title IX strictly. And it's dangerous because, one, we could see levels of enforcement or tools for equity go away in the new guidance. It's also dangerous because it makes it unclear to survivors what their rights are. And one of the really important things that Title IX guidance from the Department of Education does is it helps people advocate for their own rights. When the university that Sarah and I went to was botching my Title IX case, I went through the Dear Colleague letter, I printed it in the library, I highlighted everything that they were doing incorrectly, and I went and threw it on the desk of the Title IX coordinator, and they fixed the process. I got a good outcome. Thank God I had a document that told me what I could do and what I deserved under that process. if that goes away, how are students going to stand up for their own rights? How are they going to know that they have rights in the first place if the department is rolling back on how those rights are enforced?
Well, it also sounds like just what they yelled at Obama for like changing how he wanted to apply a law. Then, it's just.
I'm just thinking about like her meeting with men's rights activists. Like, if there had think about if we, after talking about murder, if somebody just went and met with a bunch of people who were like, well, I was falsely accused of murder, so, just keep that in mind. Like, what do you want? I just, these people.
Yeah. I mean, listen, like, Betsy DeVos's boss claims that sexual assault is just locker room talk. The leadership signal that's coming from the top down here is very clear that sexual violence needs to be swept under the rug. It needs to go back to boys just being boys, and that they don't want this to be talked about. And so what we need to keep doing in order to preserve any semblance of the progress we've made is to keep talking about it, to keep centering survivors' voices, and to call out how inappropriate this false frame is. And then we need to take the progress that we've made at the federal level and take it to the state level. Because if states don't start picking up the mantle on this, all of that progress is going to go away, and it's going to be really scary for survivors.
All right, I'm on board. What can we do?
My favorite question. So a couple of things in the immediate next couple of weeks. So the first is that people can use the hashtag #StopBetsy to talk about what Betsy DeVos is doing is wrong and share their story of why they need Title IX and why it's important to them. To be quite honest with you, the media frame is awful, and we're losing in op-ed world, for whatever that's worth, this conversation. But the American public is with us on this. 85% of respondents in a study in May 2017 said that they support the Dear Colleague letter, including 82% of Trump voters that responded to the survey. So the American public is really in support of this, and that's evident by how Stop Betsy was the #2 national trend on Thursday after DeVos's speech. So we need to keep that conversation going at the grassroots level so that can help lead us to grassroots action. As far as additional action goes, that's like off of the internet world, the department will be opening up notice and comment, which is where the public is able to give their feedback on a change that the department is going to make. So basically, before they can take this into a process that will really lock it in, called negotiated rulemaking, the department is required to do notice and comment, where the American public can comment on what they're going to do, and they're giving notice that they're going to do it. So DeVos will be opening notice and comment at some point. Again, I wish I had more specific. She's being really vague right now, but at some point in the next couple of weeks. We need people to get on that notice and comment and talk about why this is important, talk about how we need more rights for survivors, not less, more clarity around this, and that the 2011 Dear Colleague letter is not the problem. Rapists are the problem. We also need grassroots action at the local level to help local leaders in your city government and your state government to understand why this is important and ask them to fill the leadership gap that the department is creating. We also need to put pressure on college administrators to not go back. This one is really on them. And so if you're an alumni of a university, threaten to not donate until they promise to enforce rights for survivors strictly, and they stand up to what DeVos is doing and say that they want the 2011 Dear Colleague letter in place. Students on campuses should be hosting protests now, and they should continue to make demands of their administration. We really have the power to handle this at the local level, but we need people to keep talking about it and why it's so important.
I love the idea as an alumni of contacting my university. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And we have form letters and actions and action alerts for all of this at endrapeoncampus.org, endrapeoncampus.org. So people can go there, they can sign up for our action alerts. We have call scripts for university presidents. We have call scripts for if you're an alumni calling and saying that you won't donate anymore. We have email scripts. We have links to the notice and comment. There's actually another notice and comment period that's open right now that closes on September 20th. It's a broader notice and comment for decreasing unnecessary regulation across the federal government. There are thousands of comments on the Department of Ed's one right now in favor of the Dear Colleague letter. Keep doing that, because they have to publicly respond as to why they would ignore comments that people overwhelmingly are in support of. So go comment on the one now, comment on the one that's open later, and use the resources on EROC's website to get connected with calling scripts and online campaigns that other people across the country are doing.
Awesome. So there's a lot we can do.
Yes, motivational. I feel suddenly slightly hopeful.
Yeah. So for those listening, I'm going to put in the show notes the link to the website, and I will also post on the post for this episode that I put on the broadcast website some example scripts and things, if you don't mind me copy pasting from your site and
absolutely
linking back and whatnot, so that everybody can get some ideas on what they can do in addition to making a call.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and call. But I have one little thing I wanted to share when I was reading up on Title IX. So the father of Title IX is this guy, Birch Bay. And he's amazing. He wrote the 25th Amendment, which may come in handy, hopefully, one day soon. But he also wrote the 26th Amendment, which decreased the voting age to 18. And he's the only non-founding father to do that. He was also trying to get Equal Rights Amendment passed, which it never did, which is shocking to know that it never has passed. But while he was trying to do that, the higher ed bill came up, and so he just attached Title IX to that, which has been great. But I wanted to read his quote for why he thought that it made sense. We are all familiar with the stereotype of women as pretty things who go to college to find a husband, go on to graduate school because they want a more interesting husband, and finally marry, have children, and never work again. The desire of many schools not to waste a man's place on a woman stems from such stereotype notions. But the facts absolutely contradict these myths about the weaker sex, and it's time to change our operating assumptions. So he said that in 1971 as he was trying to get Title IX passed, and he got it done. So just at least a golf clap for Birch Bay. Thank you.
I would like to golf clap Birch Bay's name. Birch Bay. Rad.
So he sounds amazing, and we're lucky to have had him. So yeah, I just want to throw that in. Like, yeah, we make progress, 2 steps forward and then 2 or 3 steps back.
I mean, the idea of sacrificing a man's place is exactly what happened in Brock Turner case. Like, there's just so much, he has so much potential. Wouldn't it be a shame? God. You know, and it's just like, yeah, he has a lot of potential to fucking rape another person.
Right.
But we never talk about that potential. Okay.
So now you brought it back down.
You know, just inserting a little bit more rage in there for you.
Keeping it real.
You never have enough.
You know, I worked at the Obama White House in the fall, and it was the last place I worked before I came to EROC. And I was there during the election. And one thing that a lot of the folks that I worked with, the senior advisors to the president kept reminding us is that progress has never happened in a straight line. And so as awful as this is, how much this feels like an attack, we are actually we're losing the battle, but there's no indication yet that we're losing the war. We just have to stay engaged, and the pendulum will swing the other way. It's really hard right now, but we can't give up hope.
Yeah, the arc of history bends towards justice.
Yes.
Bitches.
Okay. I might be putting that on a t-shirt for sale. Just bitches. I think that there are times where just being reminded that these rights are here because people fought for them, not because everyone
and they need them. They're not getting them. That's why they're here.
Right. So like we have to continue to fight to make sure that they remain in place, because just, you don't just put something on a shelf and then you go, oh, well, there, we're done. That's not how this has ever worked. Yeah. So while it can be really frustrating, it's also, a reminder that what we do matters. That's how we keep this stuff going.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
I'm excited. I feel good. All right. So who's making the first call here?
Okay. So 5 Calls had a great script for us, as they often do, to just call the Department of Education and give them a piece of our mind. So I am going to do that, and I'm just going to read the 5 Call script because I thought it was just fine and succinct. So I am going to go. Let's see. And we've got a number on the Five Calls website for the Department of Education. Okay, I bet I get voicemail.
The U.S. Department of Education's Information Resource Center.
Para español, marque el número 1.
For answers to your questions 24 hours a day, please visit answers.ed.gov. To speak to a federal student aid specialist concerning the Pell Grant, loan disbursements, defaulted student loans, loan forgiveness, or direct loans, press 1.
You press 1 for me, Karen?
Press 2. To speak to an Information Resource Center specialist concerning nationally focused departmental initiatives, federal education law and policy, and other education-related matters,
Maybe
press
that?
3. To repeat this menu,
I
press
guess
9.
that.
The U.S. Department of Education would like to hear from our customers about the service we provide through 1-800-USA-LEARN. We will be randomly selecting customers to participate in a short survey.
The fuck?
Call during the next couple of days asking about your experience today.
Are they selling lawn furniture? What was that?
Good afternoon. Thank you for contacting the U.S. Department of Education. How may I help you?
Hello. I was calling to share my opinions about Title IX, if that's okay, to share with you.
All right.
Okay, great. My name is Karen Suhaka, and I am a concerned constituent from Denver, Colorado. And I'm calling to urge Secretary DeVos to maintain the critical Title IX protections for survivors of campus sexual assault, as guided by the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. This is a serious and troubling epidemic, and it is vital that schools maintain strong policy guidelines to protect its vulnerable students. So I thank you for taking my call, and hopefully I can get tallied somewhere, because I really think this is important.
You're very welcome.
All right.
We'll certainly take down your comment.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
A person!
We got a person. That's unexpected.
And he didn't sound completely uninterested or unwilling, so.
He just sounded really tired.
Like,
That was what I got from him.
Women all day long.
Well, initially what we had been going to do was each of us call, and then I would edit out the other calls, because we were going to have all been using the same script. But since it took so long to get through that first menu and whatnot, I think we can probably go with the one, and then Sarah and I can make our calls off the air, because that just is not something anybody wants to sit through 3 times in a row. I barely wanted to do it the first time.
So I loved Jessica's suggestions for other things we could do, and I'm actually quite motivated to do some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because we can't give up ground on some of these things. Just can't.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Well, and like exactly what she was talking about before, like this is such an important thing, and our news and society right now is just such a cluster of everything, and like it's going to be so easy for things that are so important to just get left behind because they're not going to get ratings, and the coverage of them is like so important.
And it is hard to say, well, do we do the hurricane bearing down on the country, or do we talk about the nuclear war that's coming, or the fact that the Secretary of Defense is over in Russia right now trying to figure out, well, like, what do we talk about?
Take your pick of crises. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying it's bad, but there's just more sexy things to cover than trying to stand up for women. Like, always.
Inevitable.
Yeah. But we're going to do it. We're going to stand up.
Yeah, I want to thank her for joining us, because I thought that was super informative and awesome. So thank you, Jess. She had to run. Those of you who are wondering where the hell her voice is.
Talking about her like she's not even here.
Yeah, she had to go to a meeting because this episode did go longer than they usually do. So, but we had a lot to talk about, and I will be sharing, like I said, all of the links to everything that she mentioned in the show notes and the post on the website. So if y'all want to get a little bit more on your to-do list for activism here, this is a bunch of stuff that you can do without even having
like 2 easy things. Like that call to the Department of Education was fine. Do that. And then also we will let you know when the request for comments goes up, and we should all put comments in. So we'll bring it up again when that happens and tell you how to do it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
So cool. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. Thank you, Sarah, for getting Jess on here. That was awesome.
Yep, tell her she's the best.
Did she just like run to a meeting with Joe Biden? Is that who she's meeting with now?
She said something about that yesterday. She works a lot with him for the
That's so awesome.
Yeah, no, Jess is quite the warrior.
I want to give him a hug.
She's gonna hug him like 4 times.
It's amazing. So that's how I'm going to advertise this episode is somebody who got to hug Joe Biden was on our show today. You should listen, everyone. Give us some legitimacy here.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you all, and we will see you next week.
We'll do it again next week. All right.
Bye.
Bye.